Hello to everyone who's joined so far. We will get started in about 30 seconds, probably. We'll just wait for a few more people to join our live stream and then we'll begin. Excuse me. All right, everyone, we'll begin shortly, just giving it a few more seconds for the last few people to join. Okay, everyone, let's begin. So welcome to today's free Foothold webinar. I'm Catherine Drake. I am the Communications and Digital Events Officer here at Foothold. And today is Emotional Resilience, the Importance of Self-Care and Boundaries. We are joined today by two speakers. First up, we have Katie Cullen-Birtwistle, and you may have seen her previously on mental health and wellbeing webinars that we've hosted in the past. She is a psychotherapist, a counsellor, a mediator and wellbeing trainer, and she will be looking at what emotional resilience is and how implementing self-care and boundaries into your life can massively support your emotional resilience and improve it. And then later on, we'll be joined by guest speaker Sam Williams. She is a chartered engineer, so everyone on the call most likely is an engineer, and she is a fellow engineer among you. She has 30 years of experience working in the complex UK defence government environment. She's also the founder of Seed Spark, which is a human-centred change consultancy and a coaching practice. And she is certified specialist ADHD coach, menopause coach, ICF business and personal coach. We've actually shared some of Sam's story on how she got into engineering on our socials today, because it's Engineers Week this week. So we're sharing a few stories from members of our engineering community. So if you fancy after this having a look more into Sam's story and the story of some of our engineers, you can head to our LinkedIn. We don't just share well, we share all kinds of things. We've got support posts, digital support like this, but also links to getting more support, whether that be in person or our digital, and all kinds of engineering content as well that you might be interested in. We like to find fun engineering stories to share, so it would be great if you could join us and yeah, head over to see us there. Today's webinar is about weathering the storms life throws at you, essentially. And the reason why I wanted to use that metaphor is because Sam, our guest speaker later, has a really cool analogy that I wanted to weave into this introduction, which is that emotional resilience isn't succeeding and thriving in those difficult moments in life, because how can you? It's about dropping anchor and being able to, in the rough seas, just steady yourself, put yourself in a place where you can be healthy and to get through it in the most safe and helpful way for you. And ultimately, yeah, that's what resilience is, isn't it? It's the ability to get through the tough times so that you can thrive in times that are more easy, and making your life a safe environment for that to be the case. So spoiler alert, the key is looking after yourself. It's self-care, it's listening to your needs, and it's setting boundaries. Setting boundaries can be one of the most difficult things for people, but boundaries set you free, as they say. Being able to say what is okay and not okay for you is game changing. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to be covering in today's webinar. As I like to say with all wellbeing webinars, it could be a topic that could be emotionally challenging for you. So the best thing to do is just look after yourself. You know what you can hear and what you don't have the ability to hear at times. So just remember that if you do want to take a break from this content, we send out the recording about 3 to 5 days after the webinar's been live. So you can catch up with the content in your own time. And yeah, we hope you get a lot from it. We're really excited. I'm just going to tell you a little bit now about Foothold. and then we will begin with today's webinar. So who is Foothold? We have been supporting engineers and their families since 1890, so it's 133 years old. We are 134 next month, and that's to ensure that no engineer or their family needs to face life's challenges without support. In the business of our lives, we often forget that being well is just as important as doing well. So Foothold is funded by engineers for engineers, and we're your starting point, giving engineers the tools they need to make their lives better right now. So what kind of support do we offer? All kinds. We offer grants, and we also have partnerships with quite a few companies. We have Anxiety UK are one of our partners. We've got a partnership with Shelter. We also have legal specialists that support our community members on all kinds of areas. So our support is vast. We have financial support, health and well-being, legal issues, care and disability, work life, neurodiversity and housing. We also have digital support, which is where I come in. So I head up our digital support offering, and this is the stuff that basically means we can get through to way more people than our direct support alone. Digital support is self-guided, always accessible, and most crucially, always free. So we've got our webinars like this, our expert blogs, our Foothold app, which offers financial and legal support and is free to download. Our Wellbeing Hub, which offers advice and support on physical and mental health. And our Differently Wired Hub, which is part of our neurodiversity package of support and provides information and advice on different neurodivergent conditions, and can also signpost to things like support getting a diagnosis. So very, very helpful hub there. We'd also ask at this point if you would consider making a donation to Foothold today. This webinar is brought to you for free today, thanks to generous donations and gifts in wills from our engineers and their families. We are going through quite a challenging time as a charity at the moment. We are a charity that's independent of the IET, but we do support IET members and the wider engineering community as well. In the past, IET members donated to Foothold as part of their IET membership renewal, but this is no longer an option as of the 1st of October 2023. So now we are encouraging our lovely, generous community to donate direct with following myfoothold.org/donate direct. Just £25 a year can help us continue to support engineers through life's challenges. We would be incredibly grateful. With very little further ado, if you have questions throughout this webinar, you should check, it should be the top right-hand corner of your screen. I think there's a tab that says Q&A, it has speech bubbles. You can click there and you can post a question anonymously or with your name, just generally, or you can say specifically you want a question answered by Katie or a question answered by Sam. They will both have a look through the Q&A at the end together and decide who's most appropriate to answer each question. And we would love to have your questions and hear from you. So we would love for you to enjoy today's Foothold webinar. I'm very excited. It's a subject I'm very interested in myself, and yeah, I think there's a lot that can be learned from today's session. So I will now pass you over to Katie Cullen-Birchwhistle, who will take you through what emotional resilience is.
Great, thanks Catherine. Hi everybody, nice to be here again. It feels like just the other day I was delivering something, but I think it was actually before Christmas, so that just goes to show you how fast time goes, which I'm sure everyone listening is well aware, and actually probably quite pertinent when we think about like looking after ourselves and managing boundaries and work-life balance, because of course, you know, that's all part of self-care and part of emotional resilience really. So as Catherine said, my background is I'm a psychotherapist and a counsellor, a workplace trainer and a mediator, and I've delivered, you know, a number of sessions for Foothold already on different topics, all kind of connected to emotional well-being. So I'm looking forward to this session today, and obviously following me, Sam will take over, and then between us we can kind of answer any questions at the end. So hopefully you'll enjoy the few slides that I have and what I've got to say. There is a short video as well, which is always really scary when you're a presenter because you're just praying that it works, but we have tested it, so it's fine. Can I have the next slide, Catherine? It's that famous last words, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so hopefully what the session will cover is just to kind of gain a little bit of understanding of emotional resilience, and I'm going to just give a little bit of background information really on two kind of different models really, and it's, you know, hopefully a bit of food for thought, and of course, as I say with everything when I deliver these types of sessions, you know, if this kind of sparks your interest, then of course, you know, you can go and do your own research or look up what I've talked about. So the PERMA model, which some people might be familiar with, and also just a little bit around how to develop a growth mindset, which can be really helpful when it comes to kind of managing emotional resilience. The next slide, please. So just a slide really to sort of talk a little bit about, you know, the kind of definition of emotional resilience. So as it says, emotional resilience is not about winning the battle. It's the strength to power through the storm and still keep the sail steady. And that comes from positive psychology website information. So I think, as Catherine said at the beginning, and I can't remember the full analogy now, so maybe you'll bring that up, Sam, when you come to talk about that. But yes, I think it is. There's quite a lot of references about kind of weathering storms, and, you know, having anchors and being in you know, kind of keeping the sails up, I guess, and keeping things sort of still. And I suppose, you know, it can be quite helpful to think of it like that. And I think, you know, we're in a time at the moment where emotional resilience is quite a difficult and challenging, perhaps, you know, thing for us to manage. You know, there's lots of stuff going on in the world, as we are well aware. You know, I used to do this type of session in the height of COVID, and I know we're not there anymore, but the aftermath of that is still existing. We've obviously got the cost of living crisis, lots of uncertainty with what's going on in different countries as well, with conflict, and all of that, you know, although it might be not directly impacting us, has that kind of seeping effect that it's going to kind of have that impact on our emotional resilience. And amongst all of that, you know, we're still trying to keep ourselves you know, make sure that we're still managing our work, our family life, our relationships. So all of that together can be quite challenging. It can be quite helpful to think of emotional resilience as having kind of three building blocks, and these are what we call pillars, which we can build our resilience on, or perhaps help work to build on it if we need to. And those can be thought of as the physical elements, so involving our kind of physical well-being, our kind of energy, our health, our kind of vitality. It could be it can be the mental or psychological elements, so including aspects like attention and focus, our kind of self-esteem, our self-confidence, our emotional awareness, how we regulate our emotions, our self-expression, our thinking, and our kind of ability to be reasonable, to reason things. And then the third building blocks is our kind of social elements. So these can include our interpersonal relationships, so that might be with like work colleagues, with our partners, with our kids, parents, friends, you know, the community. It can include the concept that we have of ourselves in terms of, you know, likability, how we communicate, how we might conform to certain groups or not. And so those three kind of building blocks are all part of our what we need to kind of be mindful of, really, in terms of like our emotional resilience and what that might mean for us and how we can build on it. And I think to bring me back to the sort of original title of the session today, in which you included, you know, thinking about our boundaries. Of course, underpinning all of this when it comes to developing and understanding our emotional resilience is self-awareness, understanding what triggers us, knowing when we might have to say no to something, which can be a real challenge for people. And as a therapist, that's something that I've worked a lot over my career with really helping people to put those boundaries in and understand what they are in the first place, because sometimes we don't know. We've acted a certain way for a long time, and we don't really, we know that it's kind of upsetting us. We know that it's affecting our emotional resilience, but we don't really understand why. So sometimes it can be quite helpful to have some counselling or therapy to understand that. And then, of course, you know, it's then possible to challenge those thoughts and be able to put in those boundaries. So it's really important that we kind of take responsibility for ourselves, understand our boundaries, understand what triggers us, develop that self-awareness to really understand what emotional resilience looks like for us. And of course, it's you know, potentially different for everybody as well. Can I have the next slide? So I mentioned in my first slide about the kind of agenda for my session, and I mentioned the PERMA model. So some of you might be familiar with this already, but if not, then obviously I'll talk through it. So the PERMA model suggests that building resilience also involves developing the different points there that make up the word PERMA, obviously: positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning and accomplishment. And it's those 5 factors that is the idea, is obviously to look at those 5 factors individually to help understand what you know, resilience looks like for you as an individual, and whether under each of those headings, you know, what that, whether you're kind of managing that to the best of your ability. So when we say positive emotions, we are thinking about people who value what they have and can look at situations in as positive light as possible, because being able to do that, you know, it can help you become more resilient and allow you to grow and develop. Now, the caveat to that, and I always say this is not about being all Pollyanna about everything. You know, we all have quite a lot of challenges in our life, so it's not just always thinking about like, well, you just need to think positively about that. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying that, you know, if we can encourage ourselves to look at situations and see what we might be able to learn from those as much as possible. And sometimes that's difficult, as is everything when it comes to our kind of emotional well-being. You know, it sometimes means we have to challenge certain parts of ourselves, and that's when, you know, it might be that you need a bit of support, perhaps through some counselling to help you do that. Engagement, so everyone engages in things to different levels. When we do things that we are good at, we are usually at our happiest and most resilient. And being aware and mindful of what demotivates us can help with putting plans and strategies in place to reduce their impact. So, you know, it's really important that we have that positive engagement and do the things that we know that are going to make us feel good. Positive relationships, so resilience requires positive relationships with your friends, family, colleagues. Obviously, we know that if we isolate ourselves, it can be detrimental to our resilience and well-being. You know, the saying, a problem shared is a problem halved, can often, you know, be quite helpful to think about. But of course, as I said at the beginning, in amongst those relationships, we also have to be mindful of our boundaries, because it doesn't mean that we just say yes to everybody and that we're just there for everybody regardless of whether we want to be or not. So it's not as black and white as that. Meaning, so finding meaning in what we do is important for motivation and building resilience. We know that something that is meaningful establishes values, dedication and commitment, and contributes to satisfaction. So it could be something around a hobby or an interest that you have. It might be about helping others, and even at work. And I say that because obviously that's not always necessarily the case, but hopefully it can be, because if we see that our role in society, in work, as meaningful, we're more likely to build resilience and be motivated to kind of maintain that and achieve and sustain that satisfaction. And then finally, accomplishment. So obviously accomplishing things is important. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be successful. So with that kind of positive mindset, we can, look at failure as a learning opportunity, which I know again can sometimes be difficult. And I would, include myself in that. When things haven't gone right at the time, it's very easy to kind of be quite self-critical, really judge ourselves, and sometimes you just need that little bit of space to think about it and then realise actually that has given me some understanding, it's given me a bit of learning, and of course with all of that you're going to be able to build your resilience. So that's kind of the PERMA model in essence. And as I said, if you're interested in that, there's plenty of information out there where you can, read more about it. But hopefully that will give you some food for thought on one of the kind of models that I mentioned at the beginning. So I can have the next slide. So this is just a short video on something called developing a growth mindset. So we know that when we feel stressed and burnt out, it can feel impossible to be more resilient and build that positive mindset. This short video illustrates the science behind something called neuroplasticity, which some of you might be aware of, and it shows us that with practice it is possible to work towards becoming more positive and then hopefully increasing your resilience. So if you can play this, then hopefully.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
Thanks, Catherine. The next slide, please. So hopefully that was interesting. It's only a short little video, but I think it explains really well what it is and how you can start to think about that kind of rewiring and having challenging those thoughts that you might have. Some of you might be aware of cognitive behavioural therapy as well, which can help to do that. in a sort of similar way, where you kind of think about the way that you've always thought about something, and then maybe channel and think about that and challenge it to be a little bit different. So when we have that kind of fixed mindset, we are potentially less resilient, and we believe that when things go wrong, we can't change things, and so then we get, frustrated and stressed. So practicing that growth mindset means reminding ourselves that with difficulties come those opportunities for growth, and the mindset allows us to take control of the situation. So again, a bit like with the PERMA model, there's lots of information out there in the World Wide Web, as we call it, on developing a growth mindset. So if that's kind of sparked your interest, do go ahead and have a look. Have the next slide, please. So my last couple of slides are just really about what you can do to kind of help manage your self-care. So the first one with regards to work, and obviously, all the points on there are really important. So, it can be that we sometimes need to ask for help and support. And as Catherine said at the beginning, whenever we're talking about anything to do with our kind of emotional well-being and our mental health, we might be sparked today by thinking, actually, I might need to think about this a little bit. I might need to kind of reach out and ask for a bit of help and support. It can be helpful to use time management skills. It might be that we need to look into sort of further training, seeking those opportunities for spending more time doing things that that are most important or enjoyable to you, thinking back to that PERMA model, and learning to use stress reduction techniques. There's so much information out there, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware. I often used to reference kind of Headspace and Calm as two good apps for mindfulness. Now, mindfulness isn't necessarily for everyone. The reason I specifically like those two, in particular Headspace, is they have really short like mini meditations on there, so you can kind of do it in 5 minutes, and it just helps to kind of ground you, especially if you are feeling kind of a bit on the edge and quite stressed. Have the next slide, Catherine. And then finally, my kind of final slide here really, and it's just a question really that I think is important that we ask ourselves all the time. What does self-care look like for you? And it's separated in those different headings there, because obviously we need to have a holistic approach to our self-care and well-being. So it's really important that we think about our physical, whether we're getting enough sleep, whether we're doing enough exercise, whether we're hydrating, whether we're eating well. Our psychological, and I've mentioned a few times about potentially reaching out for support and asking for support, or perhaps needing that little bit of help when it comes to thinking about our resilience. Of course, that's it could be to do with, it could be connected to counselling therapy. Social, communication, setting boundaries, which is obviously what we've talked a bit about today. Positive engagement on social media. Now, most therapists are not a big fan of social media, but I can see, and obviously we can all see, it does have its benefits, as well as sometimes it's not always great. But I'm aware it can be good to keep in touch with things, and it's the way of the world now, of course. Spiritual, so maybe that does include any sort of meditation, connecting to nature. There's so much research now, as we all know, about how important it is to be out in the world and connecting to the world that we live in, and really how important that is to our well-being. I've mentioned work in the slide before around time management, work boundaries, using leave, making sure you have lunch breaks. All of those things are really important. And personal, that could be around planning and setting goals, maybe learning new skills, and having that time to reflect, really, that space and time to reflect. So I think it's really important that we just think about all of those different headings when we think about our self-care. And I'm also really conscious that the word self-care is so kind of overused now, and it's a difficult one, because once something kind of catches on, it kind of it snowballs, doesn't it? But obviously the concept of it still is really important, and there is no other way of putting it really. So, you know, it is really important that we ask ourselves that question about our self-care. Next slide. So I think, you know, in essence, and hopefully Sam has got some stuff to say about her own self-care and, you know, what that looks like. So I hope, you know, what I've given you is just giving you a little bit of a taster on a couple of models there around resilience and self-care and well-being. And yeah, I look forward to answering any questions if there is any. And yes, I will pass you over to Sam. I think you can just skip through the next one.
Jump in. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks. Sorry. Yeah.
That's all right. Thank you so much, Katie. I think, yeah, we've got a good basis of understanding now of what emotional resilience is and some of the ways that we can improve it. I'm going to hand over to Sam now, who obviously, as I introduced at the beginning, she's a chartered engineer and also the founder of SeedSpark, which is a human-centered change consultancy. She regularly talks to people about how they can improve their emotional resilience, and what she will be sharing today is her personal experience of essentially how she started listening to what she needed and the huge change that had in her life. So Sam, I will hand over to you. I'll go to your first slide and yeah, looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. And yeah, hi, I'm Sam. As Catherine said, it is lovely to be here today, and thank you for inviting me. And hopefully I can build on some of the things that Katie has mentioned, all of which really, really resonate with me. So for the first half of my career, my areas of expertise were systems engineering, applied systems thinking, and organisational change. You know, very much having fun viewing the world through this macro lens. The last 6 years, however, have been an opportunity for me to embody the beginner's mindset again, learning about my neurodiversity and undiagnosed ADHD during perimenopause has resulted in me being able to extend my experience and expertise into that wonderful, complex world of change viewed at the micro level, so at the individual level. So I'm now trained as a certified ADHD and menopause coach, and a trained business coach and personal coach as well, which is helping make change happen, you know, one meaningful conversation at a time, as opposed to in the big organizations. And as I look back on my journey, I have a story to tell around emotional resilience, and I'd like to share that with you today. It's a view from the bottom and back, and I share it in the hope that it builds on some of the things that Katie has said in her slides, raises some awareness, offers some common humanity, provides a little tactical advice that has worked for me and might be of use to you, and provoking compassionate and curious conversations in order to raise awareness is why I am here and what I do. So at the end, I'm open to any question you may have. No topic is off table for me. But before we dig in, I just wanted to raise that I have my own challenges around managing my organisations, my thoughts, my memory at the moment. And as a result of that, I have to build strategies that allow me to do that in a way that's less stressful for me in these situations. So you may see me from time to time looking at my notes to make sure I stay on track and share the things that are important, or looking down at the clock, because time estimation and ADHD are an interesting combination. So that being said, let's move on to the next slide, please, Catherine. So this is me. My story begins back today in 2017, and from the outside, you know, in my fantastic Christmas suit, it looked Facebook perfect. You know, I had the perfect family, the perfect home, the perfect job. I loved the challenge. I was a chartered engineer, certified systems engineering practitioner, published academic author, international trainer and educator. You know, I loved the complexity of it, the variety, the pace. You know, I had great prospects, pension. I was brilliant social life, very popular, always out, it overflowed. My health was great, hardly ever had a day off sick. I could run 10k in less than 30 minutes on a regular basis, and often did half marathons for fun at the weekends. And as that quote says, choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life. Next slide, please, Catherine. This is also me. I was beginning to notice a growing discontent on the inside. I was never feeling present. I was numb, poor self-awareness, lots of doing, not being. I was doing too much, ridiculous work hours, studying part-time for a master's, 2 small children. I hardly ever took my leave. I often missed meals, didn't notice I needed to eat, said yes to too many things, a real people pleaser. I was drinking too much alcohol, I was drinking too much caffeine, all ways of kind of keeping me in the game. I was definitely not prioritising my self-care. I was not sleeping enough. 2 small children, studying in the middle of the night and working was hard. I was basically running on fumes, and often would end up kind of crashing and burning out for periods of time on a cyclic basis. And as this quote says, I love this quote, do what you love and you will work super effing hard all of the time with no separation or boundaries, and also take everything extremely personally. I had no boundaries at this point. I was doing what made everybody else happy, and that list never ended. It just grew and grew and grew. I was tired, I was overwhelmed, I was burnt out, and I was lost. Next slide, please, Catherine. And after many years of this approach, this plan A to emotional resilience, I came unstuck. Life happened and things began to unravel big time. As I said, I was studying for a master's with 2 small children. I'd got promoted. I was doing 2 jobs at once. I had an unexpected death of a friend that really knocked me for 6, and my marriage had started to break down. So I had a lot of stress going on in my life. I then caught a virus and had a massive negative response to it that wiped me out. So I went from running half marathons every other week without breaking a sweat to struggling to walk the 100 yards to my local pub with a walking stick. Some days I couldn't even get out of bed. Some days I couldn't get out of bed to go for a wee. I couldn't reach the glass of water that was on the side, for hours. I would sit there trying to summon the energy to reach a glass of water. I went from manipulating really complex ideas and concepts and information easily in my mind to not being able to make sense of an email if it had words and numbers in it, or work out which key on my keyring went in my front door. I went from feeling safe and secure in my life to wondering how I was going to look after my kids and keep a roof over our heads. It was scary and an illuminating time. It was a real awakening. Plan A was most definitely not working for me in terms of emotional resilience, but it was the beginning of a journey that led me back to myself and a new path. A journey that started with marriage counselling that turned into therapy just for me, downsizing in the face of a divorce, and the potential of medical retirement with chronic fatigue. So I had a real front row view from the bottom. Next slide, please. So I love this quote. I'm just going to share it with you. If you can see the path laid out in front of you step by step, you know it's not your path. Your own path you make with every step you take. That's why it's your path, by Joseph Campbell. So having spent a lifetime accidentally, unconsciously following other people's paths, I embarked on the road less travelled, into the wilderness and unknown for the next 6 years. It felt like forever and a moment. And it's only looking back now that I can join some of the dots and recognise the patterns and activities that have gotten me to where I am now in my emotional resilience. And I'm calling that Plan Z. And really, I'm conscious of that. There's a lot more numbers and letters in the alphabet for this to evolve going forward. I'm very much still work in progress. And as a change agent with an aptitude for patterns, I'm representing my change journey through the lens of a well-known business change model, ADKAR. Now, ADKAR is a people-centered change model that we use in the business space, but I'm using it here in my personal change endeavor. So it's a model aimed at helping individuals through change, and it describes 5 elements of successful change that you can see on the screen: awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. So with ADKAR, awareness comes first. So what is the nature of the change? Why is it needed? What is the risk of not changing? Without that, any change happens by accident, whether it be good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. So I was 42 years old and I realised I didn't know who I was. I hadn't got to know me at all, what I liked, what I didn't like, what I needed, what mattered to me. I also knew that pattern of burnout wasn't healthy. and it was something that needed to change. So I started paying attention and getting intentional about finding out through experiments and trial and error what emotional resilience really needed to look like for me. So after awareness, desire comes next. So change involves personal decisions. It's that what's in it for me piece, a personal choice, a decision to engage and participate. So I wanted to change. I wanted different for my kids. I could see the patterns of behaviour being passed on to them inadvertently, and I wanted to break that cycle, to be a better parent and a role model around emotional capacity and resilience for them. And there was a quote from Brené Brown's books, one of her many books that I ingested as part of my journey: be the adult you want your children to grow up to be. And it was this mantra that really kept me on course in the beginning when things got tricky and I wanted to back out and go into old ways and avoid that emotional discomfort. So my kids were the catalyst for change for me initially. Wanting it for myself came a little bit later. So if you're aware of why you need to change and you've got the desire, you care enough to do something about it, the next thing on the change process comes knowledge, understanding how to change, training on new methods and processes, and learning new skills. So I knew I was not equipped for the journey. I was not equipped for the emotional work. I had spent my life up to then avoiding emotional discomfort through distraction, through numbing of overwork and alcohol, and armouring up against it. I never learned it at school or at home. I never got to practice it in a safe space. It was definitely an unused muscle for me. So I went to therapy and I read a lot. I started getting really intentional and attentional about that. I learned about emotional literacy and the importance of having a language to even talk about it. Something more than the sad, glad and mad words that I originally had. I learned about psychological flexibility from the acceptance commitment therapy, and practicing those skills that was needed to be able to stay fully present in any given moment and to make active choices to do things that took me closer towards the things that I cared about and that mattered to me and that my values were. I learned about forgiveness practice, that it was for me and not letting the other person off the hook, that it was saving myself from the rain under my own umbrella, the effort of holding on to ill will, about self-compassion, that I couldn't give to my kids or others what I didn't have for myself, about mindfulness, and with a distracted, ever busy mind, practicing bringing myself back to the present was a really important skill that I needed to learn and practice. And then finally, acceptance, learning to accept me as I was instead of wanting myself to be just like everybody else. I learned that all change work is actually grief work. It's a process of letting go of the old instead of in order to make space for the new. And more recently, this last year, I learned about my neurodiversity, how my unique wiring worked, and how my interest-based nervous system worked. And I learned strategies that I was using weren't actually working with my ADHD and were often creating more challenges and more stress than they were helping with. And I learned about my hormones and its relationship with ADHD, which shone a light on previous patterns of behaviour. And I learned how my lifestyle and my working strategies were misaligned with my hormonal needs and the things that I needed to function well and thrive in midlife. I learned about stress and cortisol, the hormone cortisol, and the role it played in the body, and the importance of balancing that in order to allow the other hormones to be in balance and which affect some of the symptoms that we get in midlife. So armed with that awareness to change and the desire to change and the knowledge of what to do, none of that moves you forward if you don't have the ability to do something. So ability comes next. And that's, change requires action in the right direction to demonstrate the capability to make change, to achieve that desired change of behaviour. And that requires time, it requires energy, it requires safety, it requires agency, it requires space to grow, capacity and support. And this is where life threw me that odd-shaped opportunity back in 2018, chronic fatigue and divorce. So in the messy aftermath of that, my world slowed down and all of my old life was basically stripped back to bare. I shed all of the accumulated responsibilities and things I was doing for other people in one moment. I could only go slow, one moment at a time. And as I healed, I was then able to put back in only the things that served me going forward, instead of all the things that I'd accumulated before. And the final letter in the ADKAR model is reinforcement. Change requires reinforcement to be sustainable. So you can do all the other previous steps really well, but if you don't do the R, it won't stick. It will be just an act, a one-off, and you'll find yourself easily slipping back into those old ways of working, ways of thinking, ways of doing. So making it stick requires iteration and continuous attention and intention to evolve. So for me, that was working on my beliefs and values, continuously checking, what do I believe? How is, what are my values? Is this taking me towards that? Creating and evaluating habits that align to those values and baking them into rituals and routines that worked for me. Learning how to stack some of those habits together to make them more doable and easier to do, and to be able to hold myself accountable in a way that worked. And often for me, that involved including other people through either body doubling or with the help of a therapist or a coach. And also creating time in the diary. This work requires time. So diarising that time for the daily, the weekly, the monthly, the 6 monthly, the yearly review and reflection and learning cycles needed to keep me, moving forward and on track. That was reflecting on myself, but also getting feedback from others. And another quote from Brené Brown that really resonated with me here was about leadership. And I noticed I hadn't been a leader in my own life before. I was a follower of others. And Brené talks about, as a leader, you get to choose to either spend a reasonable amount of time attending to your thoughts and feelings, or spend an unreasonable amount of time attending to the consequences of having not doing so. So I'd learnt the hard way for the first 40 years of what happens when you don't spend enough time attending to this. And I had the beginnings now on Plan Z of a sustainable and evolving emotional resilience practice. So next slide, please, Catherine. So the last 6 years has been a rich experience in emotional resilience, of lessons and blessings. And I think one of the most important lessons for me was self-compassion and acceptance, in accepting all of me. Allowing myself the unconditional positive regard I used to give so freely to everybody else, to myself, was what I needed to make space for positive change. Learning to see myself more like a beautiful sunset to be appreciated and less like a problem to be solved, which as an engineer was not always easy. I learned to get compassionately curious about some of the beliefs I'd held, and letting go of the old beliefs that were no longer true for me, or helpful or empowering me. I no longer believed that I was broken, that I was lazy, that I was alone, that there was something fundamentally wrong with me, and I was no longer ashamed of who I was. I had become aware of who I was. And I wanted to build on some of Katie's slides earlier to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what self-care looks like for me, to bring some of that to life, and then spend a little time at the end, giving some hints and tips with a bit more detail around that. So next slide, please, Catherine. So this is one of Katie's slides, and to give you a bit of a feel of what self-care looked like for me, I'm going to just build on some of the bits that come up over the next few slides. So on the physical, sleep, hydration, nutrition really matter to help balance my hormones. Getting a really good sleep routine, a good bedtime routine, less TV, hydration, starting the day off with a drink, nutrition. Some things seem to affect me more than others now. So less caffeine, less alcohol, less gluten and less dairy is something that really helps me. Cold showers really kick my day off and get that interest-based nervous system into gear for me. And learning how to balance the hormones and having HRT has really been part of that, helping. Getting out, doing that movement, getting some daylight, getting some light into my body really seems to make a massive difference for me. And learning to balance my blood sugar is really important. On the psychological side, I've talked a bit about therapy and how important that is for me. I've been in and out of therapy for a while as a means of learning about myself. And now, because of my diagnosis on ADHD last year, I'm back in on a regular basis. It's now a every 2 weeks. And it's really important to help me keep on track, to help me hold myself accountable, to learn what I need to do to move myself forward. We're going to talk a bit more about some of the other bits on here in the next section of the presentation, but building in routines that made my psychological self-care has been really important. Creating rituals around that has really allowed me to make sure that those self-care needs are being met on a regular basis. On the social front, again, I'm going to talk a bit about saying no and asking for help, because those boundaries are very hard for me and something that, you know, is difficult for lots of people. But the social media limits are really important for me. So using the apps to stop how much time I spend, so I can pay attention to it, so I notice it. That outer climate control, managing whom I'm engaging with, so make sure that the people I surround myself are those that help me be the person I want to be. Spiritually, Katie mentioned time alone and connecting with nature. This is so important for me. And grounding. So grounding is, you know, literally barefoot, connecting with the real ground around you. Making time for spiritual practice and getting that into my regular routine has been really important, and it's a growing area for me. Journaling and breath work I use in all spaces of my life going for, at the moment, and getting really clear on what matters to me, and value work allows me really to connect with the wider world in a way that I haven't done before. I spend a lot more time alone now than I ever did. I was really extrovert, and now it's a real balance of I really love my time on my own, especially as a parent. And on the work side, getting really clear on what work boundaries are. So my boundaries were really blurry, and I work from home, which makes it harder. So getting really clear on when I'm working and when I'm not working, and how I transition between them has been really important. Baking in taking breaks and getting others to help me hold accountable to that. You know, I get quite time blind when I'm hyper focused, so that becomes difficult for me to notice. But being able to reflect on that, how many times have I had lunch this week, how many times have I, you know, drunk water this week, has been really, really important. Getting clear on what painting done looks like, managing the expectations with others about describe it to me, get really granular. It really helps me stay on track. And on the personal front, self-awareness, getting really clear on what matters to me and how I'm feeling, and noticing, because self-awareness is an area, part of my ADHD, that I struggle with. And I know that when I am aligned with my values and I'm using my strengths, my symptoms are a lot easier to manage and I have less stress in my life. Again, using coaching to not just help in the workplace to build workplace strategies, but in the personal space to build in things that take me closer towards the type of life I want to live, and work on some of those more trickier areas that I can't do by myself. And planning I applied in the business space around what, you know, what we look like in a year, 5 years time, doing that in my personal space, so I can start to prioritize activities that take me towards those bigger goals, breaking them down into smaller and smaller chunks, which are more doable and help me, motivate me to do stuff. Next slide, please, Catherine. So that was a whistle-stop tour, but here are some practical tips to take away around asking help and support. So reframing, asking for help, saying no, learning how to say no, managing boundaries, getting clear on what is okay and not okay, building awareness with others about who you are and what you need, and supporting networks around you that can help you work with that. And I wanted to spend a little time, just checking the time yet, on reframing asking for help. So getting curious about asking for help is really important, and understanding what that means for you. So I'm going to invite you to do a little thought experiment in your head, and I'm going to ask you a question about how do you feel about asking for help? What gets in the way of you asking for help? And what is the impact on you when you don't ask for help? And what is the impact on others when you don't ask for help? So often asking for help can feel shameful, like you're a failure, like you're being a burden. And it certainly did for me for a long time. And I'm also guessing, if you're like me, you actually like helping other people if you possibly can do. Most people do. You know, I truly believe most people are compassionate by nature and enjoy making life more beautiful for other people. So being able to help others often brings joy and connection and contribution. And being asked for help is often an opportunity, a gift for others to get to be able to help, you know, other people and to feel those feelings of joy and connection and contribution. So by reframing asking for help as a gift and not a burden can often change how we relate to it. And what I want to ask of you today is that if you knew like 100% from the highest power that you believe in the planet, if you knew that your asking for help would be seen by the other person as a gift instead of a burden, how might you think differently or behave differently around asking for help? Now, saying no is also challenging, and I used to find it difficult to say no. I still do sometimes. So how often have you said yes but wish you'd said no? How often have you committed yourself automatically without even having time to think or reflect about whether it serves you, whether you can even do it? Saying no can be uncomfortable. It used to be for me. And if it is for you, here's one thing that you could try to help. So saying no using non-violent communication language. NVC was created by Marshall Rosenberg, and it's a language and a process that focus on expressing ourselves through observations, feelings, needs and requests. It helps us connect with ourselves and others in a way that allows both of our needs to get met. So saying no in NVC means to connect with the need that is stopping you from saying yes, and to communicate that instead. So instead of saying no, you say, I'm feeling reluctant to do that because I have a need to do X, or I'm feeling torn about that because I have a need to do Y, or I'm feeling unwilling to do that because I have a need to do Z. So by expressing no in a way that's describing the need that is stopping you from saying yes, you can open up a conversation about how everybody might get their need met and build in a little bit more space and time for you to reflect on what the impact of that is on you. And we've spoken a bit about managing boundaries and getting clear on what is okay and not okay as part of that awareness process. But one little tool that I have found really helpful when there are lots of competing demands and I perhaps have, taken on a bit too much, is having a regular reflection of, what can I let go of today? Just asking myself that simple question. What can I let go of today? What can I defer? What can I dump? What can I delay? What can I give to somebody else? The word that begins with D has left me on that one. That can be a really powerful question to help kind of really offload and hold some of those boundaries around, what's going on for you. And the two other things I wanted to talk on this particular area was around building awareness and creating what's called a manual of me. So there's a couple of free websites that are worth exploring. One called Manual of Me, which is about how you can share how your preferences are and how you like to work with others in your team to make that relationship easier and minimize stress in the working relationships at work. And the other one is called Personal Boardroom, again another free website. Together we are stronger, and we need other people to support us, and getting really intentional and paying attention about whom in our network is there and what role do they play, and equally what role can we play in other people's networks. How can we be a supporter, how can we be an activator, how can we be a challenger, are really, really helpful to do. So there are a couple of free resources to look at. Next slide, please. Time management skills, a couple of tips to take away there. So reusing skills that have worked in other places for your personal time management, reflection, managing distractions, turning those marathons into sprints, turning those big ones into small things, and creating more effective work environments to manage that. So there's a few lessons that I've learned from the workplace that I now use in my personal emotional resilience management. So I have challenges around memory, attention, organisation, distraction, and it creates a lot of stress for me. So I've adapted some of the business tools that help me in the group spaces in the workplace to create a system to help me manage my organisation in my personal space. I know I'm a visual and tactile person, and I know that screens don't work so well for me. So I have repurposed, and you probably can't see behind me, but I've repurposed whiteboards and magnets to help create some of the agile practices and Kanban boards, if you've done Kanban, for my personal life. And it allows me to plan my week, to set my week up for success, so that I'm not putting too much stuff in up front, that I'm really clear on what needs to be done and it's prioritized up front. And then at the end of the week, to do what we call a retrospective and to reflect on what went well, what went not so well, and what things to do differently next week. And then to identify any new things that might need to be considered and put that in place at the beginning of the week after. And I have a really busy brain, and distractions are a real challenge for me. They break up my train of thought. They make it very hard for me to stay on track. So I use an idea called River of Ideas that helps me manage my distractions. And how it works for me is that as these ideas arise, it's really hard for me to ignore them. They just keep nagging me if I don't. So what I now do is that I have a little pot and I put my post-it notes. I write the thought down that's distracted me into the pot, and it sits in this pot until Friday. And on Friday in my diary, there is a dedicated time to review what's in this river of ideas. And some of them are things that need to action right now, and some of them are things that aren't related to what I'm doing right now and can be done later. And by having a process that I know they will be reviewed, it's enough for me to just have to write it down, get it out of my head, and allow me to carry on, so I get less distracted in the workplace. And normally by the Friday, there's a whole pot of things that I need to consider, some of which get taken into the next week, others sit on the river of ideas. And the idea of the river of ideas is that, you know, there's plenty of fish in there, but you don't need to eat them all at once. Some of them are for later. So I only need to pick one fish out at a time, and the rest can float in that river of ideas, and they'll be reflected on a regular basis. And the final thing I wanted to share around here is about creating systems for transitions, as these are often important markers in my day and opportunities for my boundaries to be blurred. Particularly the morning routine, so the getting from sleep to awake, and the bedtime routine, preparing for bed and getting a good night's rest, are two routines that are really important for me to manage. And equally, the beginning of the working day, the start of day routine, and the end of the working day routine, the end of day routine. Because I work from home, it's really important that I have clear, defined transitions between these spaces. And to do that, I have some rituals and routines that hold me accountable. Again, tactile, again, physical, so that I can really do the activities that set me up for success in those transitions. And it gives me a real sense of accomplishment when I've finished my morning routine and I've started the day well at work, that I get that little buzz from feeling actually, you know, I'm already on the right path. And the final tip around setting up effective workplace environments is what I've learned from my work with my hormones. So at this stage of my life, I know my hormones are a little variable, problematic. And certainly every third week, that week before my period, I know I'm at a real low. And if I can take out stress from that week, if I can add things in that nurture me, it can make a massive difference to my effectiveness for the next 2 weeks. So if I can plan my diary to fill that week with more nurture tasks and less demanding tasks and put them in the weeks before and after, I have found that the 2 weeks that then follow are way more productive than they ever normally would. So I get more done in that next 2 weeks than I would have done otherwise. I now work for myself, which gives me the opportunity. It gives me the ability to create that pattern, which is difficult to do in a typical workplace environment. It's one of the reasons I do work for myself. So I have that ability, that space, that agency to do that. But it definitely plays an important role in me managing my self-resilience. Next slide, please. And the final slide is learning and using stress reduction techniques. And as Katie said, there are hundreds, thousands of techniques that can help reduce stress. Here are a couple that I've learned and I use regularly and have stuck for me that I wanted to share. The first one is a technique from acceptance commitment therapy called Drop Anchor. You can find this on YouTube. It's part of Ross Harris's Happiness Trap book as well, which is what I find really useful. And it's there to help weather the emotional storms. So we can't stop the storms from coming, but we can learn how to weather them. And you can do this as a 5-minute guided practice on the YouTube video, or you can do it in a quick 30 seconds in the moment. And I use it for both. And it's the acronym they use is ACE, which stands for acknowledge the thoughts, the feelings and the sensations that are happening to you. to connect with your body, to choose to do something with your body and do it, like, you know, wriggle your fingers, wriggle your toes, plant your feet, really get intentional about moving your body. And then to re-engage with the world, to see 3 things that are around you, to hear 3 things that are around you, and to feel 3 things that are around you, and to really then feel that even though the thoughts are coming, you can still control your body and you can still engage in the world in a way that serves you and leads you towards the things that you care about. So that's been a really helpful technique. Breath work has been really useful. It's a great way of regulating your flight or fight response and managing stress and promoting calm. And there are loads of techniques. One I find helpful is hand breathing. And it's a really simple technique which you can do at work, if you know, under your desk or in a meeting out sight, and it's physical, which works for me. So you use your finger and you trace the outline of your hand. So as you go up your finger, you have a slow deep breath in, and as you go down your finger, you slowly exhale. So it's up, slow deep breath in, down, slowly exhale, and you trace the outline of your finger, slow breath in, slow breath out, and it can be really helpful. And the other way that I use, and it's part of my routine, is diaphragmatic breathing, which is like that belly breathing. I was a habitual shallow breather and a habitual breath holder, so breathing's important for me. And you know, really breathing to fill that belly up, and then on the in-breath, and then to fill that belly emptying on the out-breath. There are loads and loads of apps, as Katie mentioned, so Headspace, Calm, Insight Timer, that you can use online. And the final kind of things I wanted to talk about really was about noticing thoughts and getting unstuck from thoughts. So I often get hooked by my thoughts. They can feel really, really powerful and affect me. And I'm, as an impulsive person, that can lend itself to some behaviours that aren't helpful for me. So emotional dysregulation is just part of my puzzle. You know, the hormones and ADHD create a reality that is, I'm dealing with that on a regular basis. So trying to not let them push me around, I need to build my noticing thoughts habit really well. And this helps me manage that. It helps me minimize the impact of it and lessens the intensity of it. So identifying a thought that is troubling you is the first step, and then trying to create some distance to unstick yourself from it, and so you can consider it with a bit more perspective and get some choice and space around what you do with that thought. So one of the thoughts for me that comes up all the time is that I'm a liability. So my variability of inconsistency of how I show up with my hormones and my ADHD can often impact me and make me feel like I'm doing a shitty job, or I'm letting people down. One day to the next can be so different that I can commit to one thing and then not be able to do it the next. So I'm a liability when I'm noticing my thoughts becomes I'm having the thought that I'm a liability. So instead of I'm a liability feeling like it's right in front of my face, by adding the words I'm having the thought that, it gives me some distance from it. And I can build a little bit of extra distance by just noticing that I'm having the thought. So I'm a liability becomes I'm having the thought that I'm a liability. I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that I'm a liability. And this act of deliberately unsticking myself from my thoughts allows me to create space and see the wider world around me and choose to act in a way that is more consistent with the things that I care about and that matter to me. And my regular habits that I've built around my morning and evening routine give me an opportunity to really practice this. So I do a lot of wild writing or journaling, stream of consciousness writing. I do a lot of gratitude journaling, both on my own and also as a family. We do it at the dinner table to really build in opportunities to do that through the day. We also do a technique called Hunt the Good Stuff that came from the American military, which I do with my kids before they go to bed, and also myself. We notice things during the day that have happened to us that are positive, and then think about them in the evening and how we might go about recreating that another time. So little tricks, little habits that we can stack together to help do that. And whilst I can do a lot of this stuff on myself, and I note that sometimes these things are too tricky or too challenging for me to do by myself. And that's really where my regular therapy and regular coach sessions come in to help process the emotions that arise from what's happening, but also build strategies going forward with my coach to how I might do it differently in the future. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some practical takeaways in my story. Next slide, please, Catherine. And there's some times for questions hopefully.
Yes, absolutely. Katie, hopefully, would you be able to have a look into the Q&A
sure.
section and have a look at what people have asked? Thank you.
Yeah, we've only got 2 questions, so I'll read out the first one, Sam, and we can just sort of decide, what can I do? I mean, I don't mind giving this one a go actually, but what can I do about a person I care about who is like this and clearly burned out? They say yes to everyone and worry all the time if they're keeping everyone happy, ? They have a mindset that self-care is being selfish. I mean, we can both have a go, can't we? Shall I just say a little bit? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. I mean, I guess as a therapist, which is obviously where I'm coming from with that, I mean, it is really difficult because I think, you know, when you can see somebody else needs that help and support, but they can't see it themselves, you know, it's hard to not really want them to, you know, desperately reach out for support. I guess, and maybe Sam will back me up on this, you know, therapy, counselling, anything like that really does only work when you're in that space and time to actually be able to look at it yourself, and that's where it can be, and it is uncomfortable, as Sam said, you know, all those years that you weren't as self-aware as you are now, if I'm able to say that. That's, you know, what I heard from your story, and I guess I would include myself in that as well. Obviously trained as a therapist, I've had a lot of my own therapy as well, and you know, developing that self-awareness is so important, I think. I mean, I think all you can do is be there for somebody, and you know, and it depends on the relationship as well. So it may be possible that you can suggest to them that there is support out there. I mean, I suppose it does depend on the dynamic of the relationship. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, Sam?
Yeah, I recognise that space really well. And if I'm brutally honest, the only reason I ended up doing something different to that was because things got so bad, you know, they got so bad that I had no choice. And I'm sure there's a better way of doing that. And you know, being other focused is a really common social kind of storyline that we hear all the time. And I think, you know, normalizing that self-care isn't selfish is something we can all do, and modeling it. So, you know, awareness has to come first. You know, it's without awareness, change doesn't happen. You can't make people become aware. Our roles in it as individuals is to model what self-care looks like and why it's important. So that's, you know, the only person you can control is yourself. You're not responsible for anyone else's behavior. So if self-care is important, modeling that helps, I think, you know, gives people permission to do the same. And, you know, having conversations around, if you don't put your own oxygen mask on first, you know, I'm sure I heard those things years ago and it didn't resonate, because somewhere deep inside of me was a feeling that I wasn't worthy enough. And it did take, you know, a long period of counselling really to come to terms with that. However, I do think that, you know, doing things with others always helps, and my kids motivated me to get the help. So finding things that motivate people and stacking that self-care onto it. So if other people self-care matters, how can you do it in a way that includes your self-care? And that feels a little bit less difficult. And it did take me a long time, well, not that long, but it did take me a while to realise it was important just for me.
Yeah, we've got a few questions coming in now, so I'll have a look, shall I? How did you, I think this is at you, Sam, actually, how did you find learning what you like and getting time alone while being a parent? I have kids and feel I just live for them. I mean, I could answer that too, but yeah.
Gosh, yeah, it was hard. In fact, it was my therapist. I said I didn't know what I liked, and she just went and said, do some things you don't normally do. That was her response to that. And literally, I just followed the process and did what she said, to be brutally honest, to find out what worked and what didn't work for me. I said the divorce was a bit of an odd-shaped opportunity, because all of a sudden I had time without my kids. So I had a little time to explore that by myself. So it's not easy with children in the challenge, but yeah, just do some things you don't normally do was her advice, and kind of led me on a very interesting, not always successful, journey.
And I think, just to be a bit controversial here, and I'm a parent too, there is a lot now around their children and somehow and not always feeling like they're able to put themselves first. And I would say there's a gentle challenge there. It's okay to put yourself, you know, to kind of prioritize you sometimes. I think we live in quite a child-centric world these days, and I think that's really great on some level. But I would say that sometimes I wonder about that with people's own well-being as well.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I spend way more time looking after myself now, and that models for the children to be able to, it's okay for you to do that too. But it was really hard at the beginning, and I think I needed a bit of structure to kind of get me through that initial eek point.
I'll tell a funny story really quick if I can. Just my youngest son, when he's at football training, it's at a gym, and I have a sauna while he's doing football training, and a lot of the parents are really shocked. How could you possibly do that rather than stand there in the cold? I mean, you know, like, he's old enough to be, and obviously I wouldn't do that if he was young, but it's interesting, isn't it, that it doesn't come so easy for some of my friends who are parents to actually do that. So that's just, anyway.
And I think sometimes it's the adult perspective. The kids actually don't need as much as we think they do, and this is where they're saying no with the need that's stopping you from saying yes really helpful. I find when the kids ask me to do something that is actually kind of boundering on things that aren't serving me, I will often say, you know, my kid always wants a sleepover. Can you sleep over, mummy? It's like, I have a need to get a good night's sleep, because it really helps me. And actually they really resonate with that much more, and we have a conversation around it. So it's often the grown-ups and our perceptions about what the kids' needs are and how much they are and aren't getting. The children often benefit from having a bit more space. It's been my experience.
Yeah, very true. How do you stop yourself catastrophizing events, thinking the worst case scenario? Is that part of replacing negative thinking with positive thinking, reprogramming the brain? I mean, I guess, you know, the growth mindset stuff is interesting with that neuroplasticity and how we kind of challenge our thought processes. You know, CBT is a big advocate of that kind of reprogramming, and we'll sort of use that, those kind of the formulations that a CBT therapist is kind of taught to help with that catastrophizing. I'm not a CBT therapist, so I'm not going to talk hugely about that, but I guess in therapy I've certainly helped to kind of challenge sort of thought processes and understand where those feelings come from about why you can think of kind of worst case scenarios all the time. But I think it's quite hard to answer that in just like the few minutes we've got now, really.
I think this is one of my specialist practitioner areas. So I can't remember if I mentioned rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's quite a common thing with people with ADHD, which means, you know, some small perceivable thing can have a really strong emotional response, and my ability to catastrophize at Mach 1 speed is unsurpassed. I think I can go from naught to the end of the world very quickly, and so can my children. They have the same trait. And there are a few techniques I find helpful. So there's a wonderful work by Byron Katie called Loving What Is, which helps us get really curious about those troubling thoughts, and to, you know, with curious compassion, explore them in a way that allows us to tune in and tune out to the ones that are less helpful. So we, you know, what's the evidence for it? And then looking at the opposite thought has been really helpful for me. I can't always do it in the moment. I can never do it in the moment, but it does help afterwards often, and it helps minimize the impact of that catastrophizing. But also recognizing how much your hormones play in your inner climate and your mental mood, and how much stress affects your ability to make sense of the world. And, you know, if you're not eating and looking after yourself, you know, most of your positive, your serotonin, I think it's just your serotonin mostly comes from your gut. So, you know, if you don't have good gut health, and if you're not getting enough daylight, and you're not having enough, you know, physical contact with humans, your happier hormones, the serotonin and oxytocin balances, you know, aren't as good as they could be, which means you're naturally thinking more negative. So you're more likely to go to negative thought patterns. The noticing thing really helps me here as well, giving me a bit of distance from it. You know, belief work with my coach, you know, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it empowering? You know, really, and my therapist, who I've got this afternoon, so be some good useful stuff to take to her today. But yeah, it's tricky.
It is tricky, and I think it's true that there's still not enough said about the connection between mood and food, and I think there's a huge untapped sort of thing there, if you like, that we're starting to kind of recognise perhaps a bit more now with the kind of ultra processed food and stuff like that. But it's definitely there's lots of information out there and some interesting podcasts that I've been listening to actually around all of that gut health and the link to kind of anxiety, depression and everything, but it's just not out, I don't think, enough in like the mainstream yet. And it's a sensitive subject, isn't it, around, I think, when you're talking about food and stuff for people.
Yeah. For me, I find that internal stress really affects my mood, and if that's come from things I've eaten or drunk, so not drinking caffeine and alcohol has made a massive difference to my mood. Sugar makes everything 100 times worse for me now. Never used to, but it really does now. I know I really have a crash. Mental
but you
crash.
have to be quite strong, don't you? And you have to think about this, and you have to kind of challenge it, and get away from the kind of culture we live in, which is quite treat focused, you've done this, so therefore you can have this. And there's a whole lot of stuff there, I think. I'm just going through because there's a couple more, and I know we're sort of short of time. Have you found that ND, I presume that's neurodiversity, can get in the way of emotion engagement and responding to therapy and coaching? I guess that's for you, Sam.
Well, emotional regulation is one of the areas that's affected with ADHD, and I've had coaches who have been neurotypical and neurodiverse. I have found that having coaches who have some understanding of neurodiversity or lived experience come at coaching and therapy in a slightly different way, that is more useful for me. But you have got to be in the right space. So you get out of it what you go into it with. So that awareness and desire, that first bit is, comes first. If you don't have the awareness of the desire, you probably, is it the mind that holds the problem also holds the solution, and it's probably the best one. So you have to be going into that space, recognizing your agency and your role. Whilst neurodiversity isn't our fault, we do have a responsibility to learn how to work with our wiring and our unique biology and strengths and traits. So it's that sense of agency, I think, is most important into that space.
Another one for you, Sam. What do you mean by reducing the time span from achieving your goals? What is the purpose of this in your presentation? Do you mention 5 year to 1, 6 months to 1 month, 1 month to 1 week?
Yeah, so this is just breaking marathons down into sprints, basically. So I have a habit of, I find it difficult to stay on track, and by breaking those marathons into more meaningful chunks means they're less overwhelming. I'm more able to get granular about exactly what good looks like for each bit, but they all build and contribute to that wider goal. So I'm actually doing things that take me closer towards the things I say I care about. So it's about getting clear on the big things that I give a monkeys about, and then breaking them down into smaller chunks, and then baking that into my structures and my systems, so that I have a weekly meeting, I have a monthly meeting, I have a 3 monthly, which allows me to nest it all together. I hope that helps make sense of that.
Yeah. Someone's asked, I can answer this, do you think self-care, in particular blurring boundaries between work and home, are more prevalent since COVID? Yes. I think working from home does provide is a challenge with blurred boundaries. Again, I don't mind volunteering myself. Wasn't very well last week, but didn't take any time off because I've only got to go and sit at my desk, which is in my house, whereas if I'd have gone into an office I would have not gone in. So yes, I think there are you have to be firmer, and I think you said it as well, Sam, that you have to be strict with yourself when it comes to work life balance with working from home, and I say I feel the same.
I have a interesting dichotomy between hating routines and needing routines, and that particular boundary between work and the house, because my office is in the house and very visible. I have to kind of really work hard to bake in more than one level of structure around that, so that I can't wriggle out of it, or if I can walk over a boundary, I will do every day, given half a chance. So I know it's not useful, so I have to be quite strict around that.
And the last one really is just about signposting to people that can walk them through similar steps. Struggling to do it myself due to near burnout and ME. I don't know, I guess you've got stuff, have you, that's on your,
I mean, feel free to connect with me for particulars, because obviously there's probably quite a lot of resources I can signpost to. I had a very interesting experience with the lightning process, which really was a massive life changer for me, which is about neuroplasticity. So I would say I'm 95% back from what I had for chronic fatigue. I think I'm not maybe 100%, but I'm definitely 95% where I was 3 or 4 years ago. So yeah, definitely happy to share and talk experiences and signpost where possible.
Okay, I think we've sort of run out of time a bit, haven't we? Somebody's asked about wild writing, but perhaps they can find that on your information.
Again, you should be able to Google it. It's just a page of writing without judgment and without thinking about it, and just allowing it to come out.
Thank you so much, both of you. That's absolutely brilliant. It's amazing to have so many questions as well. Clearly shows that everyone's been resonating as much as I personally have been, just sitting here behind the slides with the discussion today. Yeah, I'll have to wrap up because we are getting to the past. But thank you so much, Katie. Thank you so much, Sam. So much to think about and take away from today's session. For me personally, I think I'll remember the noticing thoughts rather than just immediately believing them as fact. That's a very big thing. Not, you know, I am, but I'm noticing I think that I am, and what this might mean for where I am emotionally and mentally. I think very helpful, and very helpful, I think, for our engineering community to potentially use some of the ways that they work in their own journey towards better emotional resilience. So really fantastic. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. We would love to hear your thoughts. We'll be sending out a feedback form shortly, probably later today, in an email to you. So we would love to get any feedback on the subject matter and the speakers today, and anything you'd like to hear in the future. Our next webinar is next month on Friday, the 22nd of March. It's Understanding and Celebrating Neurodiversity. It's Neurodiversity Celebration Week that week, so we'll be ending that week with a conversation with someone who has lived experience and is also going to talk about the ways you can support people with neurodiversity in the workplace. Yeah, so just scan the QR code or join our mailing list to get information on that. And then just a few little things that you could do if you weren't in a position to donate but would still like to support Foothold. You can join Team Foothold on all manner of fun events and challenges, including things like the Brighton Marathon, the Isle of Wight Ultra Challenge, and the Yorkshire Three Peaks Challenge, which is the highest peaks of the Yorkshire Dales. It's quite a full-on one, that one. So if you visit myfoothold.org/get-involved/events, or scan that code there to get involved. And finally, you can connect with us on our website. You can have a look at our various social media platforms. They're all there with their handles. And you can call and email us. That might be because you're interested in volunteering or getting involved, but it can also be because you're seeking support. You can get in contact with us if you're looking for help, and we will be able to help you. Yeah, so get in touch, and thank you very much again to today's speakers, and we really look forward to hearing back from the people who've been on this live event to see what you thought of it as well, because I thought it was fantastic. Thank you, and we'll see you again next month for next month's free Foothold webinar. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.